Happy New Year. We are going to call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Redevelopment Authority to order. Today is Thursday, January 4th, 2018. This is the first meeting of the new year. It's just at 8:30 a.m. We're in the Community Center at the Sierra Room at 851 East William Street, and we're also on the internet. And for those of you who have cable, I think you're watching on cable as well. Could we have a roll call, please, for the board?
Good morning. Supervisor Aboud? Here. Supervisor Bonkowski? Here. Supervisor Bagwell? Here. Supervisor Barrett? Here. Mayor Kroll?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Sue. Nick, could we call on Nick Emery of the Good Shepherd Wesleyan to get us started for the new year? Morning, Nick.
Happy New Year, everyone. Actually, we changed the name of our church, so this is the first time in public I get to say it, but we're now called Hope Crossing Community Church. Right. And so I'm excited to be able to pray for you from that and for our city. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for this new year. I pray, God, for fresh perspective on each issue, whether it's a year old or 5 years old or many years old, that you would give new perspective and insight to this leadership team as they decide the things they need to do, and that, God, you would fill them with wisdom and understanding and hope. Help them, God, to have a spirit of unity as they seek what's best for our city. Please keep your hand of protection over all involved in our community. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we're now at item number 5, the public comment. Anybody, member of the public, want to address anything that's on the agenda today, or particularly not on the agenda, but within our bailiwick or purview? We will have public comment during the items as appropriate. We'll also have public comment at the beginning and the end. We'll do that the same as redevelopment. Okay, I don't see anybody. Let the record reflect there's no public comment for item 5. Let's take up the approval of the minutes of December 21st. Everybody had a chance to look at those? Motion's in order. Supervisor Bonkowski.
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson City Board of Supervisors for December 21st, 2017, with a correction to the year of the approval date on the signature page.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. That's the first motion of the year. All right. On the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried, unanimous. Okay, on the agenda, I'm told we want to pull 25
Charlie.
25 Charlie for further consideration on what we're doing in that area. Any other changes?
No.
Board members want any changes? So today we're going to do this morning, and then we have an afternoon session at 1:30. Okay. Everybody got that? Yeah. And so we'll be doing some appointments this afternoon, and we're doing them this morning as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. Now let's take up the consent agenda. Any members of the public want anything pulled from the consent agenda for individual discussion? Any member of the board? Hearing none or seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried, unanimous. Okay.
Nobody made a motion?
It did.
Oh, you made the motion?
There was a motion, wasn't there?
No.
Oh, well, let's go.
You made the motion.
Yeah, I made a motion, yeah. That's what I thought.
He made the motion.
I made the motion.
The mayor made the motion.
Want to go back and redo that? Somebody want to make a motion? We'll go back.
I move to approve the consent agenda consisting of item 8 on the agenda.
All right.
Second.
There's a motion, a second on the motion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. That's it. Then we did it twice. Okay. No harm in doing it twice.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah. All right, let's take up item number 10. This is a presentation only. This is from a good friend, Ed James, of the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District. Morning, Ed. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
You know, last year you brought us all kinds of snow, rain, and floods, and this year it's kind of like summer.
Yeah, well, you know, it's Mother Nature has its own little guesses. People always ask me how much water we expect each year, and I tell them I'll let you know in April. So I'll let you know in April, but I will let you know that the big floods, you know, if you remember last year, January was January 10th. So we're not there yet, and then February. So a lot can still change. So for the record, officially, Ed James with the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District. And what I'm going to give you today is kind of a brief overview of what occurred in 2017's water year. It was a very unique year. And then I'll be talking about some future water issues. This is not the focus on Carson City's system. I'm just giving you the overview of the watershed. I did meet with all the water purveyors in the entire watershed and got their input and feedback of what they see. So the future water issues are basically a combination of all of what the different entities see throughout the entire watershed. So this is really to give you a broader perspective of the entire Carson watershed. So with that, I will start. First of all, with the role. If you're not familiar, in 1998, the Nevada legislature charged CWSD with the responsibility of managing and developing the water resources in the Upper Carson. Basically, they realized that there was a huge demand for growth occurring in the future on the Carson, and yet all the water in the watershed has been fully allocated. So how are you going to be able to meet that new growth with the water allocation? And they felt it was important to have an entity made up of the counties to look at these water issues. At that time, it was just Douglas, Carson, and Lyon County were involved with Carson Water Subconservancy. And during the early 90s, the real focus was building a large dam on the Carson River. That was really the main focus at the time. In 1997, there was a major flood, and from that, there was a conference that came together in 1998. And this conference really brought the community together, looking at the issues. There were several hundred people at this conference getting feedback of how to move forward. Do you want to have an entity that's dealing just with flooding? You have an entity dealing with water supply, water quality, or focus more on an integrated process? The group there said, really, I think it's important that we look at an integrated process. They created the Carson River Coalition, which is basically bringing people together to look at the concerns on the Carson, and they asked CWSD to coordinate that effort. In 1999, Churchill County joined CWSD through the legislature, and then in 2001, Alpine County joined CWSD through a joint powers agreement. And in 2009, Story County began participating with CWSD, and so now CWSD focuses on the entire watershed. And that's really kind of our focus, is working cooperatively with all the entities. One thing that's important to know, we have no regulatory authority. So anything that we come up with ideas, we're really the think tank. And then we would bring it back to the counties, and the counties would then, at that point, see if they want to implement what was brought forward. So the structure of CWSD, we have 14 board members in 6 counties and 2 states. It's kind of unique organization. I don't know of anyone like this where you have 2 states involved that's from the ground level up. There are other organizations, but as federal decrees or other court requirements, this is the one where really it's local level through the counties. Our funding comes from property tax and also grants. So we have 5 staff members, 2 are full-time, 3 are part-time. But the staff includes specialties in all these different areas. So we have a broad perspective that we can bring to the community. And again, working with Carson River Coalition, we can bring in that bigger think tank of ideas. A little bit on the watershed. It's approximately a little under 4,000 square miles. The river is 184 miles long. Current population is roughly 125,000, and they do predict that we'll see growth. 300,000 is a soft number, but we do expect to see growth occurring in this watershed. Basically, if you start off, the river starts in Alpine County. You have the East and West Fork that come together in Douglas County, then moves through Carson City, down Lyon County into Lahontan Reservoir. At Lahontan, there is also a canal that brings water from the Truckee over. So we are connected with the Truckee at the ankles, I say, that brings water into Lahontan. And then from Lahontan, the water goes into the Newlands Project or in Churchill County. So because of that connection with the canal, we do have to be aware of what's going on in the Truckee, because that does have some impacts on our structures on the watershed in Carson. So let's talk about 2017, because it was a wild year. This here is a index, 8-station index. I like using this. This doesn't show how much precipitation actually fell in the Carson, but these are 8 stations that are in Northern California, and the storms tend to hit that, come over. So it's a good indicator of what was occurring. Now, prior to 2017, when we always talked about water years, I always said that the wettest year on record was 1982 to 83. Well, 2017 blew that out of the water. And you can see by the green line that by April, we had broken the record of precipitation that fell at these gauges. At the airport in Reno, I think they broke the record in February. So it was a very wet year, and something that was unique about it was the storms came over. Usually you have a rain shadow effect. They just blew right through. We had a lot of precipitation that came in. Lyon County, Churchill County also received a lot of precipitation, which is not usual occurring. So it was a very wet year. We had some flooding, and I'm using the Markleyville gauge here to showing this, but I want to point out that even though we had some flooding along the Carson, it really wasn't a very large flood event. It's just been so dry that people forgot there actually could be water in the river. If you look at the far right, that's the peak that occurred in 2017. You can see it was a little less than what happened in 2005-06, and about half of what happened in 1997. So even though it was a wet year, we saw some issues there. Again, I think they said it was a 20 to 25 year flood event that occurred on the Carson. So something just to be aware of, that it was wet, we had some flooding, but it really was not I would say, a huge flood event. We did have some damage. It was federally declared disaster, but it's something to be aware of in the future. We can expect to have much larger flood events in the future. But let's talk about the flows, because that's really what happened this year was the flows. And I'm comparing the 1983 to 2017, the water years. And you can see at the Carson City gauge in 1983, we had about over 826,000 acre-feet of water that went by that gauge. In 2017, we had over 928,000. So a lot of water came down, over 100,000. Like I said, we just barely broke it. We smashed the record this year. And for Churchill gauge, again, the same thing. Over 100,000 acre-foot more water went by. Below Lahontan, it's a little different. You can see that in 1983, there was over 771,000 acre-feet released below Lahontan. In 2017, it was 692,974. But you have to remember that in 83, the reservoir in Lahontan was almost full when they started out the year. In 2017, the reservoir is virtually dry. So we had to fill up that reservoir and then start spilling the water out. This is just kind of showing, comparing by month, the flows coming out of from 1983 to 2017. The blue is 83, the orange is 2017. You can see that when you hit January, February, all of a sudden the flows in 17 started really cranking up. And March and April, we did, again, much higher, and May. But look in June, July, and August, you'll see that actually in 83, we had more water in the river than we did in 17. So we had a very warm storms. If the snowpack above 8,000 plus was a record-breaking snowpack, but below we didn't have a lot because it was such warm storms. So we had a lot of precipitation falling, and it didn't all stay as snow. In 83, we saw a lot more snowpack that was able to melt off later on. So this is an indication that we're seeing a shift in our runoff patterns. Below Lahontan, you can see the releases. And you can see, again, blue is 83 and the orange is 2017. They were releasing water in October, November, December, and January in 83. Prior to that, even December, the reservoir in Lahontan was almost dry. And then they started filling up. And all of a sudden, we got a lot of water coming down. And they really did a lot of work in a few weeks to move water out of Lahontan, because they were afraid it was going to fill and spill and actually flood Fallon. And you can see in March, April, and May, they moved a lot of water through the system. But again, pointing out, if you look in 83, when you get to June, July, August, and September, more water was coming out in 83 than it was in 2017. So what was happening to the groundwater throughout the watershed? Well, the groundwater levels increased during 2017. So I got a master's degree in hydrology, and yes, that's my conclusion, that a lot of water meant that water tables came up. But nothing else that really exciting came out of that, so I'm going to move on. So let's talk about the future water issues. And again, this is kind of coming from all the different water purveyors and people I talked to this year about the concerns and issues that we see. So let's first focus on surface water. This slide I put this together about 15 years ago, and it really hasn't changed much, so I pulled up this slide. So current water situation. First of all, the Carson River is administered through the Alpine Decree. It's a federal decree that allocates water. The river is fully appropriated. All the water is allocated in the system, and 95% of the water is used for agriculture today. The floodwaters are allocated to still water. So a lot of times people say, hey, we have all this extra water, we should be able to get the water and store it. Well, the unappropriated water was given to Stillwater Project back in the early 2000s. So they have a right to it. What's kind of interesting is with all this water, Stillwater didn't get all their water allocation because they couldn't move the water through the system to get it to Stillwater. It went out into the desert, but there were constraints in the system in Churchill County that they could not fully get all the water this year. There is no large upstream storage, so we really depend upon Mother Nature, the snowpack, and it's something that as we start looking at planning in the future, we need to look at those snowpacks, and I'll talk a little bit about possibly climate change and the impacts to flows in the river. Water quality is always a concern, and we have growth we have to deal with. This here is an indicator. This is snow tell. This is 13 snow course areas. This goes from 1950 to 2015, and you can see the trend line, which is the black line going through it, is heading down. This is April 1st. We used to always use it as the indication of the water year starting for flows in the springtime. Now 16 and 17 are higher, but it would not really modify the trend line much. So we are seeing, again, less snowpack as of April 1st. Another indicator that we're looking at on the river, this was done by DRI for us several years ago. And this shows the fraction of the annual flows, which is the y-axis, compared to by the month. So basically how much water in a given year, that fraction by that month. And it split the data set and compared 1941 to 1974, comparing that to 1975 and 2009. And I want to draw your attention to March, and you'll see that in the 95-2009 period, more water was coming off than it was historically in the earlier period. And then if you look at June, you see the opposite of that. So we are seeing water coming off sooner than historically, and it's getting a drier period. So again, as we start looking at planning, if you're a farmer and the river gets drier early, then you're going to have to either go to your supplemental wells or you have less irrigation and less crops. However, if you're a municipality purchasing surface water rights in the future for growth, you have to be aware that that water may not be there in late summer. And you better have a backup supply in groundwater or other sources to be able to meet those dry summer periods. So let's talk about the groundwater. So first of all, groundwater is permitted by the state engineer, so the water is allocated. Domestic wells do not need a permit, and I'll get into why this is an important distinction in the future. However, domestic wells do use water. The groundwater basins in the Carson River watershed are over-appropriated, but the actual pumping is less than what is appropriated. So basically, if you look at what the perennial yield of every groundwater basin in the watershed and compare it to how much water has been allocated, the allocation is greater than the perennial yield. But in most places, we are not pumping greater than the perennial yield. We have one basin that we are watching carefully, and it's going to be, I used to always call it our watershed, in the canary in the watershed that we have to look at. The state engineer is now looking at this issue because it's becoming a bigger issue in this area, and I'll talk a little more about that one. But it's important to understand that we're not pumping what's appropriated. And I think that's something that's why during the drought period, we were able to meet the demands of the community with no cutbacks. Generally, the groundwater levels are not declining. So if you look at the long-term trends, They went down a little bit during the drought, but they did recover. There are a few exceptions. But again, it shows that our water supply, we're not mining our groundwater resources in the watershed. Groundwater issues in other watersheds, it's important to keep an eye on the Humboldt River. There is some litigation going on where the water users in Lovelock are suing the groundwater users upstream because they believe that they are taking water that should come down to them and they have a senior right. How that litigation comes out could impact what's going on the Carson. Also on the Walker, the state engineer tried to do a curtailment of groundwater pumping. First time ever that they would try to do that. They were thrown out in court, and then a wet year came along, so that kind of issue gone away. But that again is something to look at if they have to start curtailing groundwater resources because of drought and surface water interaction. What does that mean to our watershed? These are just a couple graphs from the state engineer's pumping records and kind of talking about some of the groundwater basins. This is the Carson Valley groundwater basin. The blue line that goes through is actually the flows in the river, and that's shown in acre feet on the right-hand side of the y-axis, and then the left axis is the y-axis is the pumping for groundwater. What's interesting to note that when the water in the river is really high, the groundwater pumping is lower, and mostly it's because of agriculture. They have a lot of supplemental wells, so when you have a dry year, when you can see the line down, they're pumping quite a bit of water, and you can see in 2015 that quite a bit of water was pumped for agricultural purposes, and that's the green bar there. In the Dayton groundwater basin, again, the green bar shows you your water used by irrigation. The orange is your M&I or domestic or M&I use, and the blue bar is your domestic wells. You can see in 2011, which was a very wet year, there was some agriculture pumping, but not a whole lot. Then the other years were drier, but you can see that 2015 wasn't significantly higher. That's because there's a limitation of how many supplemental wells are out there, so you won't see the fluctuation as much as you would in Carson Valley. You'll also note that the municipal water use is starting to drop, and that trend is continuing in 16 and 17. So we are seeing less water being pumped for municipalities. Several reasons. Conservation was kicking in. Some people were taking out their lawns, and also water rates were going up. So people are reacting to that and actually using less water. Churchill Valley, this is the groundwater basin underneath Silver Springs area. And the green is your agriculture, the red is your municipal, but the big one is the blue, which is domestic wells. And you can see in that area the domestic wells use most of the water in there. They do have some agriculture use, again, not a whole lot, and it's hard to tell, but the M&I use has been dropping in that area too. Domestic wells are basically a calculation by the state engineer of 1 acre per dwelling unit. That's how they calculate it. This gets into the issue of wet water versus paper water. And I'm taking the data in 2015, and you can see by categories how much is allocated in irrigation, just under 4,000 for irrigation. The commercial stock has 445. The municipal water rights in that area are a little over 5,000. Domestic wells do not need a water right, so again, they don't have any allocation there. So the total water committed out there, water allocated, is 9,399. In 2015, you can see how much they pumped. Agriculture was under 500. The municipal was also under 500. In the past, they were above 500, but they've been cutting back. And the domestic was pumping 1,353 for a total of 2,309 acre feet of water. However, the perennial yield out there is 1,600. That is a big issue. So there is a lot more water on paper, but not wet water. And there's a lot of pressure for growth out there. There's been a lot of meetings out there. There's a lot because of the road now, the road from 80 to 50. The industrial park's linking in. There's a lot of people want to put houses out there. The state engineer actually had a meeting in December, meeting with the community, and letting them know that this is something they're going to have to deal with, that these water rights were allocated, given to them, permitted, But if the water's physically not there, you can't take the water. And that's going to be an interesting discussion as they move forward. At what point you are going to cut off? Most likely the growth is going to happen, so they're going to have to bring in water, probably by pipeline or groundwater or river water being pumped into the system. It's going to be a little more different than actually groundwater pumping. But this is probably going to be the first basin the state engineer is really going to have to start coming down on saying, wait a minute, yes, you have a water right, but you cannot use it because it's not physically there. So it's changing the whole discussion in the state. I also did this for Carson Valley. So people asked about this. And you can see the numbers here. On Carson Valley, the total water committed there is 94,516. But you can see the pumping there is 38,000. And the perennial yield, give or take, is about 49. So again, over allocated, but the pumping is not above the perennial yield. So we're in pretty good shape there. You're probably saying, well, what about Eagle Valley? How come you didn't have the data on that? It's because the state engineer had not finished their report on the Eagle Valley one. And the difficulty with Eagle Valley is they're just talking about groundwater, so it doesn't really give you a picture of what the water supply is, because you get so many different supplies. You get water from Marlette, you get water from Ash and Kings Canyon. You have all these different sources. You also get water from the river. So just pulling a pumping inventory really doesn't give you a good picture of what your water supply picture is. And your staff would be a much better entity of giving you a better picture of where your water sources are coming from. So general water issues, and again, this is generally came from all the users I've talked to in the watershed. Infrastructure needs. It's amazing. Everyone, I don't care if you're Carson City or you are Marlette, Markleyville Water District. They all said the same thing. Infrastructure needs are critical. Some need new water lines, some need to replace old water lines, more storage, more wells. This is something that's going to have to come around. The other thing they pointed out was because the economy is turning around, all these things are costing more than originally, or when the engineers estimate. So every entity is dealing with this structure now of more infrastructure and the cost being higher. On the same point, most water users, or most water purveyors are seeing their water use is going down for the last 10 years. So people are cutting back. They're not using as much, which also then impacts your revenue supply. So here you are, your costs are going up and your revenues are going down. So this is causing some issues for every water purveyor in the watershed. Potential water law changes, we got to watch that. What's going on in the courts? There's a lot of litigation being presented right now. Now a lot of them are on hold. Again, a good wet year, put that on hold. But this year is starting out dry. We really need to be aware of how the state's going to have to deal with these changes in the future. Limited water supply east of Dayton. So as you get to Dayton, basically if you're Dayton upstream, you have plenty of water. You can actually meet today's demand and the future demand. They're in pretty good shape. You are getting east of Dayton, Stagecoach, Silver Springs. There is a real limitation, and yet there's also a demand for growth. So again, infrastructure needs will probably have to occur. There is some wet water out there that can meet some of the growth, but there's going to be a limitation. You're not going to be able to grow to some of these large ultimate development proposals out in that area. More induction wells. We're going to be seeing more water being used from the river for M&I use. So you're going to see that. You currently take water from the river and you have 2 induction wells. I see other communities doing that in the future too. Water quality concerns, especially in groundwater, as things change. You have arsenic issues, radon, uranium issues up here. Arsenic, there's the Marlette, the Minden wells providing you water. There's a question is, if they pull the aquifer that hard, are they going to draw in arsenic into the areas? And so these are some possible studies that we may want to be working with the USGS to see, can you keep pulling these wells that hard and not draw in arsenic, or will you be drawing arsenic in the future? So these are just some of the questions that we want to pursue in the future. And the need for upstream storage. Now this does not mean a large dam on the Carson, but this might need an off-channel storage. And in Canyon, it may need some groundwater storage. Stagecoach is a possibility in the future if we have pipelines getting there. But if the water is coming off sooner, climate change continues that way and we get less snow in the hillsides, we're going to have to store that water in the springtime, and we're going to have to figure out where we're going to store that water to meet the M&I demands of the future. And I'll finish off with, on January 30th, at 8 in the morning, we are going to start, we have a water summit. We have the state engineer going to come and talk about what he sees. I call the title, What Keeps Him Up at Night Issues. We also have the USGS. They're doing quite a bit of work. One person is doing on climate change and the change of flows. Another person is looking at groundwater, surface water interaction in Carson Valley and how that may change things. So we have quite a few, and we have also NDP going to be talking about changes to the use of reclaimed water, because I could see that as a big source of water in the future. So I believe you have flyers of this, but if you're interested, this is going to be a chance for the community to come out and actually hear from the experts of what's occurring and what we see the future may bring in the Carson. So with that, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Ed. Good presentation. Who was the source of your estimate of 300,000 by 2050? Or do you know?
That was just some old reports I was looking at. It's really, I would say, a soft number, because if you look at what the, some of the other projections, they don't show it as high. But I think you have, part of those came from originally from the water purveyors themselves. They all had projections. The thing is, when I originally talked to them, they say, well, we figure 4% growth, which for the 10 years out is not a problem. The problem is when you get out to 50 years, that compound interest starts going really high. So I would not say that 300,000 I would not focus on, but I would focus that we're going to see growth, and that's what we have to plan for.
Oh, yeah, we'll have growth, but I was just questioning that high figure, that quick growth across. When you got Alpine County, that's probably not going to add to that very much.
Well,
But
they've added 2 people last year. So.
real hardy souls for winter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Secondly, I was curious about your groundwater thing, which said that, could you go over that in a little more depth? Because I was amused by your hydrology reference and the groundwater. Basically, you just said, here's where we are, and then moved on.
Okay, sure. And depth is probably a good idea talking about with groundwater. When you look at, what I was looking at was, are we seeing concerns? There are some places in the state of Nevada where if you see the water tables dropping, and then you get, and during a drought, you would anticipate that to occur. And then if you get a wet year rebounds, then you know that you're utilizing your resources, but you're not mining your resources. There are other places where the water table's dropping, you had this wet year, and yet they still continue to drop, or they flattened but are dropping. That's a concern, because that means you're mining your resources. That means that your resources will not be there in the future. And that is a real concern, because then it's also, if you're close to the river, that means you're drawing more water from the river. So if you're in Churchill County, you're really concerned, is that going to impact our water supply in the future? The only places that we're really seeing this water levels dropping a bit are more in the foothills around the watershed, and it's really because of a lot of domestic wells. So it's domestic wells impacting domestic wells. There was an issue a while back with Kings Canyon in your area, but these wet years, it's not going to be an issue, but if you get a couple dry years, you will see the water table dropping out there. And that's something to be aware of, but it's not because of municipal use, it's just because of all your domestic wells out there. Ruined Stroth is another issue that could be in the future. But really what I'm seeing is more in the foothills where we're seeing the water levels dropping, and that's just a concern that they're going to have to deal with the community on domestic wells. But that was really what I wanted to focus on, and I did look at about, I'm going to say over 100 different wells in the watershed, and it was good to see a lot of them coming back. In fact, a lot of them came back to where they were historically with the records. So it's an indication to me that our groundwater resources today are still very strong.
Finally, there's not much doubt in my mind. I wonder if there is in yours. There's still a big debate about climate change, and all my reading tells me, at least in the Sierra Nevada range, we're gonna have less over time. Is that your view too?
Yeah, and I look at there's there are a lot of scientists doing these projections out in the future. What I looked at is what are we seeing actually physically today? And that's why those graphs I showed you where the snow tail is dropping as of April 1st and also the shift in the runoff. Those are physical data points that we have to be aware of. Now, if you want to say climate change or whatever is going on, there is something occurring in our watershed that's impacting our flows today. If those trends continue in the future, we better be planning for it. And so a lot of it is what ifs. What if this is going to happen? What if the concern's there? I know several people say we don't believe in climate change. It's not happening, or it's not man-made, or something else. That's fine. But when you do planning for resources, you always want to plan for the worst-case scenario. And to me, again, since we have no upstream storage, if that snowpack starts to disappear in the future, if we're not prepared, the communities down here could really suffer. And especially if you start buying more surface water for M&I growth, that's the concern. Today, it's really going to impact agriculture, but in the future, as growth occurs and you have to go to the river, that could be a real concern. So you really need to make sure you have your planning in place. I will say that Carson City is in a great situation. You have a lot of different resources, and you're probably the envy of the watershed because you have enough water on hand for your future growth. Other communities are the ones I'm more concerned about.
John, you finished?
Yep.
Yeah, just a couple questions. You know, is the with the delay in water coming down out of the hills, what's that doing to the start of the crop seasons?
My understanding is it really hasn't changed much because the crop growth, it really depends on sun and everything else. What made it really tough like this last year, and this of course was a very wet year, there was too much water. So the crops were actually, they had too much water to grow. It took a while for the ground, because they need to have the ground warming up too for them to take off and grow. What really would happen with this shift is you would have more water going down, and we see this already in some of the other analysis, and it'll probably run right to Lahontan. So for Churchill County and all, that's a benefit to them, but for the ranchers, they really can't use that water because A, it's too cold, or the ground's frozen, they won't be able to move things through the system. So there's just, it's the late season water supply that's really a concern that we see.
So the late season water supply, does that, can they shift their start and end dates of crop growing to meet that?
Not really. I mean, physically, the crops won't grow quicker. I mean, you just can't make a crop grow in February or March. The best growing days are, of course, when you have long suns and stuff like that. So unless we're going to move the sun around the earth, we really have an issue that, you know, the best growing days are June and July, and if there's no water to feed the plants, then you're not going to have as much growth.
Are there new technologies coming out that will actually allow someone to know with a degree of certainty what your groundwater capacity is, what's actually in the ground?
We have much better science as we go forward and more data, but we'll never have the exact figures because you can't see on the ground. There are so many different things down there. It's going to be more indicators, but I think that's what you have to really look at is what the indicators are going on. But as technology improves, we can have much better modeling that can give us a better indicator of what we can see in the future, some what-if scenarios. But you know, you'll never have 100% understanding of the groundwater resources. It's too expensive. I mean, you could do it if you physically put wells everywhere and get a better understanding of the transitivity and the structure of the aquifer. But I think really what I look at is long-term trends and looking at the wells we have and the indicators, and that's probably your best indication of what's going on underground.
Just a kind of off-the-wall question. I mean, I think we usually set water permits calculated to see what it does to your perennial yield. Do we know how deep underground water goes in any particular basin? I mean, how deep the aquifer is?
Well, every aquifer is different. Carson Valley is actually a fairly deep aquifer. There's a lot of water stored in Carson Valley because of the way it's been developed over the years. Eagle Valley is probably a little more shallow because you're up in the mountains range. Every one of them is differently. And then, of course, if you go too deep, you're getting into geothermal water. That could be an issue there, too. So most of the time, most of the wells that we're dealing with are probably a couple hundred feet, I think, in municipality deep. We'd have to talk to Darren how deep your wells are around here. I will tell you, though, when southern Nevada, they're drilling wells 1,600 feet plus, so to get to groundwater. So it really depends on the aquifer makeup to figure out how deep you can go and what water you want to get to. Sometimes going deeper means it's less, the water quality is worse, not better.
Thanks. Any other questions of Mr. James, Mr. Waterman? Anybody? Public comment? Anybody want to weigh in? I know he's going to have a big water summit coming up on the 18th. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the 30th.
30th?
Yep.
30th. Be a fascinating one to listen to. Yeah. Anybody? Okay, I don't see any. We ready? Thank you, Ed, very much. And
Thank you for your time.
all right. All right. Let's take up the issue of number 11, whether we're going to acquire a new articulating haul truck for the landfill. Morning, Laura. Morning, Zach.
Good morning.
Why do we need to spend $500,000?
Big truck.
I know it's a big truck. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be my answer. It's a very large truck.
All right. Good morning. Laura Rader, Purchasing and Contracts. This is to approve the purchase of a Volvo articulating haul truck for the landfill from the NJPA Cooperative Purchasing Agreement for a total not to exceed amount of $596,940 to be funded from the equipment replacement account in the capital projects fund, and it is budgeted. And Zach is here to explain
Zach, you want to add anything? We've got a couple questions up here, but go ahead. You want to tell us why it's necessary?
It's in addition to the equipment line up there at the landfill, as we know that we've been seeing influx and more garbage coming into the landfill, and especially with the Douglas County deal, and it's just to expand the equipment line to accommodate that. Feel free to ask any questions.
Zach, what's the estimated life of the truck?
Based on utilization patterns of our previous haul truck, we're looking between 10 and 12 years.
And we're keeping the truck that we currently have. What shape is it in, and how much time do you think we have left on it?
So that truck is a 2007 model, so we have 11 years on it and around 13,000 hours. I expect to take it to the 20,000 hour mark, so I'm expecting at least 5 more years.
Any other questions, Zach? Public comment? Anybody? It's one of those things budgeted, correct? All right. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move to approve the purchase of one Volvo articulating haul truck for the Carson City landfill from the NJPA Cooperative Purchasing Agreement for a total not to exceed amount of $596,940 to be funded from the equipment replacement account in the Capital Projects Fund.
There's a motion and a second on the motion. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I don't have my, where's our IT guy? You got it?
Sure, we got it.
My little vote thing's not popping up anymore. It's all right. You could fix it when you take the iPads after, huh?
It's coming.
You want to see it? You don't believe me. It's like my wife, man. You don't believe me. All right, come on up here.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify, man. All right.
Said she already voted.
All right, for the record, I'm not crazy. All right, let's go on, take up brownfields. Before we get to this, is there disclosure? Supervisor Bankowski?
NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. I serve on the Commercial Real Estate Committee for Northern Nevada Development Authority. The committee is an advisory committee with no decision-making authority. Though I have this relationship with NNDA, a reasonable person in my situation would not be materially affected by such a relationship. Further, the matter before me will not be affected by my relationship. As such, I will be participating and voting on this matter.
Okay. Supervisor Barrett?
Yes, I serve on the NNDA board, and I will replicate what my colleague Supervisor Bankowski said. I will be voting.
All right. Any other disclosures? Okay. Who's doing this? Mr. Plemmel?
I'll do this. Good morning, Lee Plemmel,
Andrew, with you there? Okay.
Community Development Director. This item is
Tell us how
to,
much is going to be spent at the brownfields in Carson City. It'd be helpful.
how much will be spent in Carson City?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me introduce this item. It's to approve and authorize the mayor to sign a memorandum of agreement to participate in the Brownfields Coalition assessment grant with the Northern Nevada Development Authority and Douglas County for a total grant amount of $600,000. Just by way of a little bit of background, I have Andrew Haskin with me from NNDA here to add anything and answer any questions. They submitted this grant and actually were successful in obtaining the grant. It was back in November of 2016 that the Board of Supervisors authorized the submittal of this grant. They've been awarded the grant on December 7th of 2017. The Douglas County Commissioners approved the memorandum of agreement that's before you. And to specifically, so what it is for the Brownfield Grant Program. It's going to be managed completely administratively by the NNDA. I mentioned in there that administrative costs are reimbursable, but we don't anticipate any costs to the city for administration other than just working with NNDA and developers as we normally do for them coming in, but NNDA is going to be doing the administration. And of the $600,000, it's going to be split up between $400,000 on hazardous substances, $200,000 in petroleum, and maybe Andrew could talk about the split of between counties.
Sure. Andrew Haskin for the record. Good morning. The split will really depend on the properties that we come forward, or that come forward and we assess. Ideally, it'll be roughly equal, but it doesn't always work out that way. It really just depends on where the priority is.
And how do you get somebody to make an application for a brownfields examination? Who does that? Property owners come before you, or municipalities, or who?
Yeah, the property owners. If the city has any sites that they're interested in having looked at, we can definitely look at those. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much how the
And are there remediation funds in addition to just analysis funds?
These are just, this is just for assessment. There are, through other grants and other programs, remediation dollars, but we can't pay for remediation under this grant.
I've got a couple questions. Go ahead.
How many sites potentially would qualify for this?
In the city?
Yes.
I'm not sure at the moment. Part of the grant is to do to kind of take an inventory of sites and start prioritizing them. So after the memorandum of agreement is signed, we'll issue an RFP to hire an environmental consultant, and then we'll begin working on that. As part of the grant, as part of our cooperative agreement with EPA, we've committed to do 25 phase ones, and I believe it's either 10 or 13 phase twos. excuse me, it was 11 phase twos. So.
In Carson City, so a few years ago, there was, we had a brownfield grant that was managed by the city a few years ago, and the focus of that was the commercial corridors downtown and then extending along our commercial corridors. So we do have an inventory of potential sites there that are already documented that they know of and useful, but I think the focus of this is more now to the larger industrial sites and bringing in the manufacturing type of uses.
And I might be able to answer both of your questions a little more as well. Typically, when a commercial industrial property is listed, when it goes into escrow, then as part of the buyer's due diligence, they would have the phase one done, and typically that's a lender requirement. In this particular case, what it allows us to do is when a property is listed, to have the seller move forward with that work prior to it going into escrow, so that due diligence is already done and it can expedite the escrow process. And typically you're going to see a phase one required on any industrial building that is going to be sold. And again, that's because it's a lender requirement. The lender wants to know what hazardous conditions might exist at that property. And you're going to see a phase one done on raw dirt before it's built on. So any commercial or industrial building that's going to be built, plus any existing industrial site, is going to require a phase one and possibly a phase two, depending on what the assessment comes back on from that phase one. So there's plenty of properties. We won't have any problem spending the money.
Okay.
So, just listening to what Brad had to say there, so then do they last for long? How long do they last? So let's say you went and did a phase one on a vacant property. Is that going to work for a lender for like 2 years,
6
3
months.
years? Oh, they're good for 6 months? Wow. So then we want to pick properties that think they're within, they want to get ready to sell or they want to get ready to develop.
Correct, yeah, that's part of that inventory process that we're going to go through. I guess I should have clarified that a little bit more, but yeah, we're going to be trying to prioritize stuff so that we know that we're assessing properties that are going to be moving in the next 6 months,
That's
ideally.
typically on an existing building. If it's raw dirt and you have a phase one done and it comes back clean, nothing's going to change over time. So if you provide that, a buyer may want to have an updated phase one done, but it's really not necessary because nothing has changed.
Something else, if there's a building that may not move within that 6 months, but we suspect that there might be an issue where they would have to go for a phase two, then it would be beneficial to get that phase two paid for through the grant.
Okay. Public comment? Anybody? Board? Any more? Go, sure, go.
So the benefit of doing the grant then potentially is we may have owners or sellers that would not normally maybe be able to afford to start the process. And so I'm just trying to get what the benefit is to us at the city level is to have the inventory and they know that they can sell. I'm trying to get the emphasis of
Right.
why.
It's a timing issue. If a phase one is done by the seller in advance, then it may save a buyer or developer 4 to 6 weeks of time. And if a phase two is called for, it could potentially save several months, if not maybe even a year. We had a property out in Mound House that went through the phase one, needed phase two recommended remediation. By the time we got through the remediation process so we could close escrow, it took 2.5 years.
So it expedites.
Right, so you're expediting all that because you're doing a lot of that work up front. NNDA has a certified site program that completes a due diligence program for developers up front, and this is part of that as well, where that's a part of that due diligence package is a phase one and potentially a phase two, so that if a developer is coming in and they need to be up and running with a building in 12 months or 14 months, a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks can make the difference whether we get the deal or not.
If I could add too, part of the funding through the grant is also for cleanup and reuse planning, and through that cleanup and reuse planning, we can actually pay for a very limited number of certified site packages, basically. So we'll be reserving those for really high priority sites, but that is also available.
Yeah, Andrew, that leads to the question. Tell me more about the certified site program. How many do we have now, and how many do you hope will come in the next year?
Sure. There are 2 that are completely certified now. We have another 3 in progress. 2 of those were actually through the grant. And then in the next year, I hope to have probably, well, it's hard to say in the next year because these grants are for a 3-year period, but through this grant, we hope to have another 5 and possibly another 1 or 2 through our existing or our other grant in Lyon and Churchill counties.
So this grant runs for another 3 years from now, or 2.5 years, or whatever?
It'll run through September 30th, 2020.
Okay, all right. Well, it's a good deal to do in terms of, development. And I know it says that it's supposed to be reprioritized, among other things, for redevelopment areas as well. It's a facilitator, there's no doubt about that. And so use the money wisely so that we're actually giving it to people who have a strong likelihood, or not giving it to people, but using it in areas that have a strong likelihood of moving forward on things, as opposed to, we're thinking about it, but we may not do it, okay?
Absolutely.
I think that's fair.
That's what I was after.
All right. All right, anybody else? Anybody? Motion's in order.
Okay. I move to approve and authorize the mayor to sign a memorandum of agreement to participate in the Brownfields Coalition Assessment Grant with the Northern Nevada Development Authority and Douglas County for a total grant amount of $600,000.
There's a motion and a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried, unanimous. Thanks, Andrew. Say hello to everybody over there. Give him a happy new year for us. Tell Hooper I've got his phone call. I don't know. I'll call him. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Did you vote?
I'll have Lori double check. No, it didn't. No. All right. Are we doing fences again? Our favorite subject is, right, that's what favorite subject. All right, who's going to start? Hope, go.
Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. Thank you, Mayor. Mike Drews, Chairman of the Historic Resource Commission, is here as well. I will make the presentation, and I'll rely on Mike to answer questions. You may recall in June 2016, you considered an appeal of the Historic Resource Commission's decision.
We forgot all about that,
That's why I want to remind you, Mayor, regarding a vinyl fence. You upheld the decision of the Historic Resource Commission, but at that meeting, you directed the Historic Resource Commission to work on language to clarify the development standards so that appropriateness of materials would be specifically addressed. The HRC did address the appropriateness of fencing materials in the historic district in the proposed ordinance, as well as provided a methodology similar to what in their discussions they said, let's have findings, kind of like you have for a special use permit. So other materials can be considered, but we have a methodology when we're considering alternative materials. So you'll see that methodology included in the ordinance as well. The proposed ordinance identifies wood, wrought iron, decorative woven wire, and in limited circumstances, masonry as materials are traditionally associated with fences located in the district, and identifies, I'll say findings in quotes because they like the concept of findings, but we don't refer to them as findings, that would be considered when alternative materials are proposed. In considering any text amendment, the Planning Commission has to make 3 findings of fact: master plan consistency, land use compatibility, and impacts on public services and facilities, as well as on public health, safety, and welfare. The Planning Commission at its meeting of December 20th, 2017, considered the proposed amendment and was able to make the findings in the affirmative and has recommended approval. And as I mentioned, Mike Drews will answer questions. I'll pinch hit as desirable. Thank you.
Here's a question, Mike, and then you get started on telling us what your ideas are here. It says that vinyl fences are prohibited. Are they in fact prohibited?
No. They are. We wanted something stronger than discouraged because we wanted it more black and white. They're prohibited, but if you can meet the findings, we can grant an exception. So if you could answer the questions that we've listed that show how it's compatible in scale, mass, how it would be appropriate, we could make that exception.
Okay, all right, go. I'm sorry. Want to just take questions now? Or do you want to? We got some
However
questions.
you'd like to proceed, Mayor.
We got some questions, and you guys are all pros at it. You can fill in where you need to. All right, I've got one down here.
Hi, Mike. For the record, just so that the public can hear, the criteria that you set for fencing is based on historic record and outline that so that folks know.
The criteria we set is based on the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and the Carson City Historic District standards, which kind of mirror those federal ones. And it looks at compatibility, it looks at materials and texture and things like that. So we're just pretty much going down through that list of criteria that the Secretary's standards shows, and just asking you to address those and show us how it may be appropriate.
Mayor, if I can just add to that, in the district, you have 2 types of properties: contributing and non-contributing. And I think the commission recognized that you sometimes have non-contributing properties, which means that particular property doesn't contribute to the historicness, if you will, of the district. And so it might be appropriate in those cases not to have that picket fence that you would see in the rest of the district. So the commission put wording in that recognized that the design and the materials associated with that particular property may justify an alternative type of fencing.
And we're also aware that in the district, you may have a back fence or a side fence that's not visible from the street. And if someone wants a vinyl fence there and can show that it's appropriate and wouldn't be visible, we might allow that. So.
Other questions of the board? Public comment? Anybody? Any fence issues out there? All right. One, Mike, for the Historic Commission, say thank you for doing the due diligence on this one. I think it solves a big issue. I mean, we went through it pretty hard last year, and I don't mean to make light of that, but because it was a strain for all of us, and including the applicants and everybody who has participated. So we appreciate the work that the commission did to put these together. Let's see how these all work out. I mean, it should do the trick, and so we'll go from there. But pass on our thanks. Okay.
Yeah, and we'd like to, the commission would like to thank Hope and Dan Yee for their input into this too. It was helpful. It was definitely a joint effort, and I think
Hope was helpful.
All right. Hope was hopefully helpful.
All right. Board members, motions in order. Somebody want to make a motion?
Let me guess, 2018-1.
No, bill number. Bill number 101.
101. Okay, I move to introduce on first reading Bill number 101, an ordinance amending Title 18 Appendix of the Carson City Municipal Code to revise certain guidelines for the design of fences located within the Historic District of Carson City with a correction to the approval date.
We're okay? On the motion, discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Thank you very much. All right. Let's take up item 13. This is finance. This is, we're going to open a public hearing pursuant to NRS 244A and 350.020 subsection 3 concerning the proposed issuance by Carson City, Nevada of its general obligation limited tax sewer bonds in the amount of $4,875,000. These are for stormwater issues. We've been through this before, but this is now a public hearing. The hearing is now open. Okay, anybody want to say anything? I don't see any. Why don't you give us a rundown on what it is so the public who's listening out here can see? Tell us what's going on.
Jason Link, Chief Financial Officer. This bond issue is a general obligation limited sewer bond secured by additional revenue, so it's basically a revenue bond, for lack of a better description. Series 2018A in the aggregate principal amount of $4,875,000 for the purpose of financing sewer projects for the city.
Or maybe just a general comment, because I received a question from a constituent that really ties to the next budget item, the next agenda item for the budget augmentations, to understand that we're using the revenue that is generated by the sewer fees to pay the bond, but why are we issuing a bond versus using the cash on hand from the sewer account? Because they saw large balances in the sewer account, and so maybe you can just briefly discuss why we're not using cash on hand to meet the sewer needs.
Certainly, there's been a strategic plan that's been done, and the Utility Finance Committee has designated certain reserve funding that needs to be held within the sewer fund for additional projects and for potentially pay-as-you-go into the future capital projects. This project is going to be an immediate project versus building those reserves.
John, Supervisor Barrett.
Could you also explain why this is a general obligation bond, even though it's, as you said, basically a revenue bond?
Certainly, the financing interest rate is better if it's based off of this methodology than if we did just a purely revenue-generated bond. So it's a saving debt service methodology.
Yeah, and just again, I know we since we have some time, why don't you just give a thumbnail view of what the difference in those types of bonds are?
Certainly. A general obligation bond is backed by property tax only or other revenues of the general fund. It's a general obligation of the entity. A revenue bond is secured by specific revenue sources, and so it's a little bit more restrictive from the bondholder's perspective. And so they like big, broad pockets of money to go after if we don't generate the funds, and so it's less risky for them to have a general obligation bond than a revenue bond.
Okay. The new tax law is going to preclude refunding bonds, correct?
It's going to preclude the advance refunding.
What does that mean?
So if you're paying off a bond in advance of its original maturity date, bonds are typically set up so that you have the ability to call bonds early. So set it out 30 years, but if there's an early call date at 25 years or 20 years or something like that, you can't refund it. You used to be able to refund a bond in advance of those call dates and then basically set up an escrow fund that would hold those funds and then just pay them off into the future. The new law is preventing that type of advance refunding.
That's a refund. How about a refinance, or talking the same game?
They're basically the same concept.
So over time, we've used refunding or refinance bonds to save money.
Correct.
Save interest costs. What happened? Is that flexibility now gone?
It's not gone, but it's more restricted. So you can't set it up in advance of the refunding, in advance of the call date.
Because I'm on
Early.
Yeah, you can't do it early, but you can advance.
You can do it.
Put it in the original bond to have separate
Yeah.
call dates.
Yeah, you can do it at the original call dates that are in the bond.
But you can't do anything, if interest rates decline, you can't go back and refinance that bond out.
It significantly reduces the ability to do that.
All right, Supervisor Bunkowski, I'm sorry.
We lose our ability to match the economic cycle to the refinancing or refunding of the bond, which means that we probably won't be able to take advantage of the refunding like we did this time. We refinanced almost all of our bond debt to reduce the interest rates and saved millions of dollars, and now we will no longer have that benefit unless we get lucky.
That's correct. We need to lobby our Congress people.
Well, that and make sure that, we squeeze as much out we can on the interest rate as we go to the market. I know that's easy said, but I think we just have to be careful about that as well. All right.
And a good reason to make sure we have a great bond rating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. This is a public hearing. Anybody want to weigh in? Anybody? All right, then, unless there's nobody, I'm going to close the public hearing on this, and we're going to go on to the next agenda item. So last time, I don't see anybody, so we'll close the public hearing on this item, and we'll move to item 13, Bravo. This is the the finance augmentation we do every year. Going to do this? Mr. Link, go.
I am going to do this. This is going to be a little bit different format than what you're used to in the past. I'm going to go at a more high-level presentation for you as opposed to the detailed spreadsheets that you've seen in the past. So I have a quick presentation for you, and I'll walk through the major funds and what's happening. So for the general fund, we're doing an augmentation for $2.9 million. Most of that is a change in the beginning fund balance, the carryover coming from under expenditure and additional revenues in the prior year. The expenditure categories that's falling into, general government. Within that, most of that's restricted revenues for the assessor and DA. Public safety is a decrease primarily related to fire. Judicial is for an AV project that the courts are doing. And then the transfer out decrease is primarily, again, related to fire for the change in the ambulance fund that we'll see later.
Jason, before you go off that slide, do we know how much of that decrease for public safety for fire is being reimbursed from out-of-state contracts?
What's happening with that particular change is with the additional revenue that you'll see in the ambulance fund for $1.2 million, we're decreasing the transfer of $350,000 that was going to the ambulance fund, and it's being replaced by funding savings within the wildland fire department. And so there's a small net change that you're seeing a decrease for there between the two of them. Does that make sense?
Do you want us to ask a question as we go, or you finish it all?
Sure.
Okay, so I just think for the general public that the slide doesn't really tell them a lot if you're not really familiar with budgeting and all of that. So the crux of this one for the public to really understand is the $1.6 million figure. That's the good figure on that piece of a slide there, is that we were able to gain $1.6 million. So we spent less and received more. That netted us $1.6 million more available dollars for expenditure than we budgeted in the general fund. I mean, that's a really good job by everyone holding down the expenditures and then the sales tax outperforming projections. So just to kind of let the public know that $1.6 million is the good news, Nancy. We're going to have to come up with a name for Jason, but that really is the crux of what's on the worksheet.
That's correct. Yes. That is the good news.
Which, it is good news, and which goes back to Supervisor Barrett's comment about bond ratings. So we want to make sure that when the next bond rating comes up, if we could ask for one, it'd be nice to do. But we want to make sure that, we present a great story of what we've done here, because that $1.6 million figure is a good figure to put in their face when they come out here. I mean, if anything shows responsive fiscal awareness, that does. Okay, all right, go on.
Next one is the Capital Projects Fund. Again, fund balance is the major revenue source, plus we've got $800,000 coming in from the energy bonds and some intergovernmental revenue. So again, to your point, most of this is related to capital projects that you'll see on this next slide for expenditures where that's being allocated to. For the general government, that's board designated vehicles, roof, and voting equipment. For public works, we're talking about landfill equipment and the energy projects is where that's landing. Any other questions on this one?
We're giving $11,000 to the courts.
Yes.
We don't need the money.
Their big project is in the general fund.
Yeah, could you explain the transfers out?
The decrease in the transfers out, these are transfers that are going to other funds, and this is a reduction in a transfer for debt service. Any other questions?
Is that complete? You done on the high level one? All right. I know we've all, had individual briefings from you on the nuts and bolts part of this. So public comments, anybody want to weigh in on what's going on here? I don't see anybody. Okay. Yeah, we need a motion on this one.
I do think, can you go to the ambulance fund? I think it's important for the public to recognize the work that the fire department, finance, and that the project we had implemented to do the BLS ambulance. So I think we should just take a moment for the public to recognize, again, we brought in $1.2 million, and that's from the Medicaid contract. So I just wanted to put it again out on the record. Thanks staff and everyone that worked so hard to create another funding source to help relieve the ambulance fund. So I just think it's important we put it on the record. And again, thanks staff for all the work on the billings and working with the Medicaid contracts. So nice job.
Yes, you can see $1.2 million coming in from intergovernmental, and then as we were talking about, the reduction in the transfer in from the general fund right there. They've designated an additional $277,000 this year in expenditure, and the rest will fall to fund balance.
That's almost paid for half that big truck we bought a little bit earlier, that $350,000 reduction, so nice job.
The other one that I did want to bring to your attention,
Let me just say before we move off the ambulance fund, if former Chief Shrehans is listening, he started the ball on this, and Chief Slayman carried it through. So, this has been in the works for a while, so hats off to Chief Shrehan for getting this moved down there, okay?
Very much appreciated. The other one that I did want to bring to your attention is the Redevelopment Authority, just as a discussion point right now. We do have a separate agenda item for it, but this is the slide for the Redevelopment Authority. And you can see it's primarily related to fund balance, and then there's the difference in the transfers between each of the funds for the Redevelopment Authority. And it's primarily dedicated for facade, downtown street, and undesignated.
Right? Anything further?
That's all I got for you.
All right. Anybody, again, want to weigh in on these issues? I don't see any. Motion's in order. Somebody want to make a motion?
2018 one?
Supervisor Bagwell.
Okay. R1. I move to adopt resolution number 2018 R1, a resolution to augment and amend the Carson City fiscal year 2017-18 budget in the amount of $38,222,700. This is really little. Is that $69? $769?
There's a motion and a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing and seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried. Okay. I think that does it for us right now as the Board of Supervisors. So we're going to recess as the Board of Supervisors, and then we'll come back as the Redevelopment Authority. If it's okay with you, Karen, let's take 10 minutes and come back. So we'll be in recess for 10 minutes, and we'll come back as a redevelopment authority.
selection. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Redevelopment Authority and let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Is there any public comment at this point in time? Seeing none, move on to item number 17, possible approval of the minutes of December 21st, 2017.
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson City Redevelopment Authority for December 21st, 2017 is presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. On to item number 18. Jason, are you going to take us through this?
Thank you, Jason Link, Chief Financial Officer. So this is a budget augmentation for the Redevelopment Authority. And as we discussed a few moments ago, the majority of this is a beginning fund balance change, and it's being designated for the facade and downtown improvements and undesignated.
Okay, thank you. Are there any board questions?
No, but a comment. I just want to thank you guys. I wasn't here when you did it, but the facade program is wonderful. And so I'll just jump in and take credit. No.
Thank you for that, John. Appreciate it. Brad? Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
Resolution number 2018 RAR1.
Correct.
I move to adopt resolution number 2018 RAR1, a resolution to augment and amend the Carson City Redevelopment Authority fiscal year 2017-2018 budget in the amount of $355,658.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. On to item number 19, 19A.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
I'm
Nick?
sorry. Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, Madam Chair, this is an item for the board to elect a chair and a vice chair of the Redevelopment Authority for a one-year term.
All right, so do we have any suggestions, questions?
Yeah, I nominate the current chair, Supervisor.
What was that? And thirded it, okay. All right, we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
And then I would nominate the current vice chair to remain as vice chair.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, Lori, we're on it again. Okay, all right. That's good. Okay.
I didn't get that.
All right. Now we're on to item 19B, which is to appoint 3 members to the Carson City Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee. And there are 2 positions for citizen at large and 1 for business operator or property owner, each to fill a 3-year term. So, Nick, are our candidates here?
Did you know who seconded those motions?
John did one. I feel like there's the mayor and John.
Yeah, I don't think so. Never mind. Yeah, I don't.
Because she said there was a second and a third.
Right.
As long as the middle
So he didn't push his button. Sorry.
Welcome. I don't know if you've been through this process before, but I'll have you introduce yourself, and then each one of us will ask you a question or 2. And then you're welcome to remain in the room while we interview the other candidates and then make the hard decision, which is to pick the ones that are going to work for us. So if you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. First of all, Happy New Year to the mayor and the board and members of the executive committee. My name is Michael Smith. I've recently moved, well, not recently, I've been in Carson City now for 7 months. I recently moved from the South. I guess you can tell by my accent, I'm not from here. I've relocated here from Mississippi, right near the Memphis, Tennessee state line, DeSoto County. I'm a retired high school principal, educated for over 32 years. I currently work a part-time job in Reno at Patrick James Menswear. I do want to thank the mayor and John for coming in and supporting me and purchasing the items there. But one of the things that I want to do, obviously, when I was back in Mississippi, I was part of the DeSoto County Economic Development Committee. I also had a 501c3 organization called the North Mississippi Cultural Foundation. I'm very attuned and very in-depth when it comes to tourism, cultural activities, and just trying to promote diversity within that respective county and city. When I moved out of here, I didn't want just to become a taxpaying citizen. I want to be engaged, I want to be involved, and I want to be part of the process. So when I saw the information in the Nevada Appeal, and which I read every day, by the way, I said, well, this is an opportunity for me that want to come in and try to be involved and make a difference in the city that I now reside in. So I'm very proud to be part of Carson City. I feel that my experience and my background brings knowledge in this particular position. That's a committee, redevelopment camp committee, and I would certainly appreciate your support. And at this time, I would entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And that kind of takes care of my first question as to why you would want to be part of the RAC committee. And so my question for you is, what other aspects or needs do you see that need funding in either redevelopment area 1 or redevelopment area 2?
Well, obviously, you know, being a new citizen here and bringing in unbiased reports and information, I would like to look at everything from A to Z. To see exactly what can we improve on, where there may be areas that we may cut, where there may be areas we can strengthen, and also to get the input from the chair and the citizens of the committee, and also this board, as I will be having a listening ear to any recommendations and or suggestions. As we know, we are all elected by the people, and we want to make sure that we serve the people with fidelity and transparency. So I would take a look at everything to make sure what is in the best interest of the RAC committee and how we can move that agenda forward. You're welcome.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Brad. How you doing, sir?
Good. Historically, redevelopment funds in Carson City have been spent on either infrastructure or incentives or special events or a combination of any of those three. We have been recently moving away from funding special events and incentives and more towards infrastructure. So could you give us your thoughts on all three types of expenditures and the pros and cons as you see them of each?
Well, certainly, when those dollars are earmarked for certain entities, you want to make sure that they are used and appropriate in the best possible way. You mentioned, for example, I'm going to take activities, cultures, and what have you. There are all kind of grants out there now available that the city or this committee can look into see what may be available to use those dollars in other areas and not take those dollars from the RAC committee to put them into activities or cultural activities or what have you. So we would take a look and see what grants are available. We will also be able to make sure that all the line items are funded for the intent purposes of making sure that those dollars are earmarked for that. And we have to look at, because the RAC committee doesn't have this endless bottomless pit of money that they can just pull from and say, we're going to do this, because they have a certain budget they have to adhere to as well. So we want to make sure that the dollars used are appropriated for the correct funding amounts, and we will have to look at that as a committee as a whole to make those hard line decisions, but yet make sure we do it with fidelity and transparency. Thank you.
Let me just follow up a minute on Supervisor Bonkowski's question. Do you think the city should be in the business of giving economic development incentives to developer for the development of particular pieces of property?
Well, Mr. Mayor, you know, obviously the aorta of any city and in the business development would be trying to bring in new businesses, trying to promote smaller businesses, but yet to be that engine or that hub of economic development, you want to also look at what's best for the city in areas not so much of residential property, but yet you want to make sure that there's historical parts as part of that too. If you're looking at historic preservation, if you're looking at what's best for the city as a whole, not only to retain your current businesses, but also to attract new developments and new businesses as well. I hope that answered your question.
There's no right or wrong answer in these
Okay.
things. So is there, go.
See if I can dive in a little bit differently. Currently in the redevelopment fund, we allow $25,000 to participate in a facade program. So we'll pitch in $25,000 if the property owner will repair their facade. And one of my questions on that program is, do you think there should be a length of time that they have to do a commitment for the project? Do you think it's enough money, or is there anything in a facade program that should be changed or improved?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, you know, we want to make sure that Carson City retain its beautification and pleasant to the residents and also the visitors that come through this city throughout each and every day. Yes, I think there should be a time limit given. You know, you can't just allow things to linger on and on and on. There are certain building codes, there are certain guidelines one must follow. Now, I don't believe in giving everyone the whole kitchen and caboodle. I think there's some opportunities that you have to work with those individuals and work with those businesses to make sure they bring those things up to standard and to elevate that level of professionalism and that level that you want to make sure that it will be appeasing and attractive to the citizens and also the visitors of this wonderful city.
Yes, Michael, have you done due diligence on where these funds come from and how they're expended in preparation for this day?
To be very honest with you, John, no, I have not, to be honest with you, but yet this is something that, you know, obviously the first thing I want to do is get elected to the committee, and then working with the chair and then co-chair and others, we would look at those things together. And obviously, being a new citizen here in Carson, I want to come in and be able to work with, and then that way we can establish those things together and what's best for the city, because I want to be able to get my directions from the chair and the co-chair on what's the best way to proceed in this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anything else you want to add?
No, just the fact.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And you're welcome to remain while we interview the others.
So, Madam Chair, as you know, under this item, you had not only the reappointment of Court Cardinal, which per your board policy, you can do administratively. We did have one of the prospective members for this. You actually have two citizen at-large positions that are vacant. One of the applicants, Timothy Garber, did send an email. He was unable to attend. He requested his name be pulled. Obviously, we have heard from Michael Smith here. The other two attendees had confirmed they were going to be here. Unfortunately, they're not here. So for the two vacant citizen-at-large positions, we've had just Michael Smith here show up today.
Thank you for that information. Well, then I will bring it back to the board for determination.
We should administratively reappoint Court.
Yes.
I would
yes.
make that motion if that's important.
Yes, please. Okay. We have a motion and a second to reappoint Court Cardinal, so we'll do that first. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes. Now on to the second appointment.
I move to appoint Michael Smith to the Carson City Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee as a citizen at large, and based on the city, no, that's it, period.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. And welcome, Michael. You'll be a great addition to the RAC.
Thank you.
Thank you. On to item number 20, one last public comment. Seeing none, then I will adjourn the Redevelopment Authority and turn the gavel back to the mayor.
Okay. We're going to call a meeting of the Board of Supervisors back to order. We'll take up item 23 alpha. This is to appoint members of the board to various boards and commissions that we have. Let's see, so we should start with, which ones do we have here? Mayor Pro Tem. I just like as the mayor to make my prerogative to say that I'd like to see Karen continue for the last year as Mayor Pro Tem.
Great.
All right, so all in favor of Karen as being mayor, go. Can I do that or not?
Did we miss the appointment to the RAC from one of the board members,
From the RDA.
from the RDA? Sorry. for the
I
RDA.
apologize,
I'm looking at it going.
I was talking to Mr. Smith, but the RDA
Okay.
needs to appoint one of the members of the RDA to the RAC.
19C, yes. Well, I'll reopen the Redevelopment Authority.
Let me recess. We'll recess the Board of Supervisors and reopen the Redevelopment Authority.
Okay. And if I may, can I make a motion? I would like to move that John Barrett remain on the Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee to fill a 3-year term ending January 2021.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Now, one more public comment. Seeing none, we'll adjourn as the Redevelopment Authority and turn the gavel back to the mayor.
Okay, we're going to call a meeting of the Board of Supervisors back to order. We're now on item number 23, Charlie. This is Mayor Pro Tem. We have had a motion and I believe a vote on
23A.
23 alpha. 23 alpha, I'm sorry. As for Mayor Pro Tem for this coming year. We took a vote on that, correct? Okay. On RTC, we have 2 members. Everybody want to stay the same? What do you want to do? Okay. Entertain a motion that we have Lori and Brad on the RTC.
I move to retain Brad and Lori on the RTC.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Let's do the Audit Committee. Lori, you want to continue on there?
That'd be fine.
Intend a motion to appoint Lori for another term on the Audit Committee.
I move to appoint Lori to another term on the Audit Committee.
Second.
Motion second on the motion discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay. Let's do Cultural Commission. Karen, you want to stay on that?
I want to stay on it.
All right. Anybody else? Motion
What term?
I would-
Term?
for the term.
1-year term?
It's got to be 1 year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1-year term.
I'll let Adriana speak
on.
to this.
Actually, there's 2 options. You could appoint her to a 1-year term, or you could appoint her to the whole 3-year term. However, her last 2 years, she would serve as a citizen at large. And then when there's an opening, you can appoint one of the board members.
Let's ask Karen what she'd prefer. Okay. And
Take it.
at this point, I'd like to say that I think that the board should still have a representative at that juncture, and just to put it out there, I'd be interested at that juncture a year from now if we want to do that. I know it's not a requirement, but I think there should be a board liaison working with that committee.
And having served on that committee for quite some time, I think it's really important that there is a board representative. Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, no, do the 3 years, and when she goes off, we'll find a hole.
You may also have a vacancy at that point.
Right.
Yeah, we do.
Right, so.
Okay, so we got it all met. We can.
This is one of Karen's passions, and it's one of mine, but Karen has done yeoman's work, or yeowoman's work, and she should continue as long as she wants to.
All right, we'll entertain a motion to appoint Karen for a 3-year term to the Cultural Commission with the understanding that Supervisor Barrett mentioned that when the next opening comes up, we'll have a board representative to go in that position.
Yeah.
I move to appoint Karen Aboud to the Cultural Commission for a 3-year term ending 12/31/2020, with the caveat that, and when her term ends, that she would roll into a citizen-at-large position.
Okay, on the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Okay. NACO, anybody want to take my position on there? Otherwise, I'd like to stay on.
I move to nominate the mayor.
I'll stay on. And I just got appointed, I'm the NACO's representative to the Sixth Amendment Affordable Council Commission.
Good for you.
We'll see where that goes. I mean, there was a big legislative whoop-de-doo about it this last time.
That's huge.
All right. All in favor of having me stay on the National NACO board, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That's for term ending this year. Lori, you want to stay on as alternate?
Yes.
Everybody wanted motions in order to appoint Lori for another year for alternate to the NACO? There's a motion and a second. On the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then we need 2 to the Western Nevada Legislative Coalition.
That's you and I.
You and I don't care. It's fine with me. Want to stay on there?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anybody else want to jump in? Okay, on a motion, let's have
I'll make a motion.
motions in order.
I'll make a motion for Bob Kroll and Brad Bonkowski to serve on the Western Nevada Legislative Coalition for 1-year term ending 12/31/18.
Second.
There's motion, a second on the motion, discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Okay, and Lori's the alternate on that one, so Lori, you still want to serve on that as an alternate?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor, we'll take a motion to appoint Lori as the alternate to the Western Nevada Legislative Coalition in my place.
So moved.
Second.
Alternate. On the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Let's go to Nevada Works. I got a call. Who's on Nevada?
I'm on it.
You're on Nevada Works now?
And I'll stay on it.
Okay, that's a 1-year term. All right. All right.
So we want a motion?
Yeah, motion's in order.
I move for Karen Aboud to be appointed to Nevada Works for a 1-year term ending 12/31/18.
Second.
There's a motion, a second on the motion, discussion, hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Okay. And
Yeah,
to
Shelley.
TRPA, understand Shelley Aldine wants to continue on in the hotbed of.
She can do it.
She does an excellent job. She's been there for ages. She knows what's going on, and one of us would probably enjoy being on it, but you can't beat the history that she's got up there. So, all right. So, let's have a motion to reappoint Shelley.
I move to appoint Shelley Aldine as the board's representative on the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency for a 1-year term.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. Now, did we cover everything there? Did I get them?
We'll do the RTC in the afternoon.
And, but we're not going to have 25 Charlie. We're going to pull the Parks and Rec one, right?
Right.
Okay. You sure I've got everybody? You want to take a second and think about it? I got everybody, though, I think.
Cheryl, did you have a question about the very first appointment?
No.
Okay. I think we've got it. Thank you.
All right.
We did RTC, Brad.
Are we ready for public comment at the conclusion here? You ready? Because this afternoon, we're going to do, wait a minute here now.
I have a comment on 24.
Yeah, let me, 24.
It's our board actions.
Okay, hang on a minute. Because we
Just finished 23, right?
we just did that one, though.
23A is done, so we're.
So 24, 25 alphas, I mean, so, but we're going to do that. Well, we've already put you on, this afternoon, there's one, too, for the audit committee.
That got pulled, right? 25, they got pulled?
No,
No,
25.
25C got
25 Charlie.
C got
But we
pulled.
need to do
So,
item 24 right now.
okay, we'll do 24 here. All right, let's take up concluding public comment for this morning. I think no, we don't have to do that. Let's just do 24. Okay, we're on item 24. Go.
So I just wanted to let you all know, I met with Jennifer Budge and the owners of Western Nevada Football Club, and they're interested in donating a stadium and field with lights and all, potentially at the Livermore Park or at Centennial. I know, I'm so excited, you guys. And so I would like to explore their offer, and potentially we could have that at our February retreat maybe. I don't know where the agenda's sitting, but I'd like to bring that up for a public discussion and see what we could do to move that proposal along. It's pretty rare you have a private entity that's willing to 100% pay for something, and it would be a big gain for the community, so I'd like to see if we could move that along.
First, I'd like to say that I walk Dodie, my dog, out at the river probably 4 or 5 times a week, and that the work that's been done to recover that situation is wonderful. It really is. And a lot of people are out using it because we have such great weather. Secondly, I'm really tired of all this bickering over our committee assignments.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say, we do bicker over these committee assignments, but I'd like to also thank the board for, its efforts for the past year and look forward to a good ensuing year. I mean, this board, so the public knows, at least in my opinion, this board, I'm not necessarily including myself in this board is very good about looking at the nuts and bolts of what goes on and also making sure that it understands its role as a policymaker and then working with staff to get things done. But I'd just like to thanks to the board for a good year. We put $1.6 million in the contingency fund, that speaks highly of you folks. So, all right, anything further? I don't see any more concluding public comment. Anybody for another time? Anybody? I don't see anybody. Mr. Jomi, you back there? You want to? Nope. Okay, just smiling. All right. All right. Then are we ready to adjourn for until 1:30? All right. All right. So we'll be adjourned till 1:30.